Olá, gente, tudo bem? Hoje vamos começar com a nossa primeira palestra da Comp Week. Muito bom ter vocês aqui com a gente. Iremos ter a presença do nosso querido Ahmed, que irá falar sobre as responsabilidades de um desenvolvedor front-end. E quero também agradecer nossos patrocinadores, que são a Bídica, a Seidel com a Levitt, a UX e a Equals. Irei falar um pouco mais, né, sobre o Ahmed. Ele fala inglês, ele é do Egito, e espero que tenham aí um pouco de paciência em relação às questões de inglês. Estarei aqui para ajudar em qualquer tradução, em qualquer coisa que vocês mandarem nos comentários. E fiquem com ele, espero que curtam bastante a apresentação.
See my presentation window?
Yeah, it's here.
Yeah, great. So, hello everyone. My name is Ahmed Fwela. I'm CTO of Bidaya Development, a software house in Egypt. I'm also a senior Flutter developer and backend developer, working with ASP.NET Core with over 13 years of experience. And I'm really glad to be here presenting to you in Comp Week. And today we're going to discuss your responsibilities as a front-end developer with Flutter as an example. So what we will talk about today is, first, you need to know your customer, and then you need to know your job, your responsibilities with Flutter, and then we're going to have an open-ended Q&A session where you can ask me anything. So first of all, who is your customer? There are two types of customers in general. There is either a company or an individual, and their requirements are a little bit different, as the company usually needs long-term employees, you work in a team, and when writing code, you focus on readability and architecture for maintainable code. Also, time is very strict since others depend on you finishing your tasks in time. So you would, for example, the project would have 1 month, but then you would only have 2 weeks to finish your tasks. You don't have the full time. And the second type of customer is an individual, which usually only asks for a specific project or a task. He needs, for example, a system to manage his own company or his own small market, for example. And in this case, you work either solo or maybe with a small team. And the focus here would be on the results. So you would be writing your own code, and also you would be the judge here. You need to say when this code is okay and when it's not. But the good thing here is that time is a bit more lax, so you have the freedom of when to finish the project. Now we're going to talk about front-end development. So the job description of a front-end developer is someone whose main responsibility is outputting a working app on a specific platform. Some platforms might be Android, whether it's a phone or a watch, iOS for the iPhone, or web for web applications or websites, Linux or Windows, Mac OS, and TVs, for example, using WebOS or Android TV or Apple TV, which is tvOS. Or you can also have game consoles like PlayStation, Xbox, and things like that. So, what people don't really know is that game development is actually a branch of front end development. And then we're going to talk about another thing, which is cross platform development, which is the ability to develop on multiple platforms at the same time using a single code base, which works by creating an abstraction layer between all the platforms while providing ways to interact with platform specific APIs. For example, Flutter works with mobile, web, or desktop platforms, React Native, which works with mobile, web, desktop, or TV. And we also have Unity or Unreal Engine, which are game engines. They are able to target mobile, web, desktop, PlayStation, Xbox, Switch, or any other platform that can run a game. So let's give a very quick introduction about Flutter, which is a modern cross-platform framework for developing consistent UIs across all platforms. It is built with the Dart programming language, and it works by nesting widgets during the build phase, which get translated to pixels during the render phase. It also gives you complete control over what to display on the screen. So, as a developer, as a front end developer, what exactly do you get? What is your input? So, since developing front end apps is the last stage of the development pipeline, and after this you move on to the testing phase, that means you have all the work of your previous teammates to build on. And your previous teammates, they output either user stories, they output UI mocks, they output graphic designs, they output backends. And you have all of this to integrate together. It's your job integrating all of this together to output a working front end app for a specific platform. So let's take a look at what your output actually means. First of all, you're responsible for implementing the UI, which means that you will be given a UI mock or a graphic design, and it's your responsibility to display something that resembles closely that UI mock or graphic design when the app is run. And to make your life easier, there are actually tools that help with that. For example, if the UI mock you received is written in Figma, you can use the Figma to Flutter plugin, for example. Or your designer can actually write or help you directly coding the Flutter app in Flutterflow, which is targeted for designers first and programmers second. This way, the designer will do the design on Flutterflow's website and you will get the Flutter code automatically ready. The second responsibility you have, or second output you need to make sure you have, is caching. Your app should have the ability to cache data to reduce subsequent loading times that are visible to the user. Also, caching is a requirement when authenticating users, so logging in and logging out, and storing their access tokens. There are packages that can help you with that. For example, shared preferences for storing anything, and Flutter Secure Storage for storing secure data like access tokens. You also need to integrate with the back end. And the back end is, well, there are many ways to build backends. There are many protocols to communicate with backends. The two most famous protocols are gRPC, which is, well, written by Google, and HTTP, which is a global standard. So what would happen here is that the backend developer, in addition to, well, writing the backend, of course, they would document the API gateway that you need to use. and they would either documented with protobuf for gRPC or documented with OpenAPI specification, commonly called Swagger. And then he would give you that documentation, which you will use code generation to generate the integration code. So you don't actually have to write any of the integration code yourself. You can simply use a code generator. For example, Package gRPC and OpenAPI generator projects can really help with the code generation here. There's also another task you have, which is deserialization or serialization, which is the ability to convert between Dart classes that you can access statically via code and data representations like JSON or XML or even binary when you're using protobuf. And combined with caching, which was discussed previously, this will help you represent your data using Dart classes, as I said, static typing, and this is most importantly error prone. So instead of writing magic strings like access the JSON object, which has a property called results, which has another property called error, which has another property called, well, this gets really hard to maintain, especially when updating the models. So some packages that can help you with code generation for serialization is JSON serializable and Dart mappable. Another task you also have, which is a very important task, is authentication, which is the ability to log in or register or log out users and also store their session information for future access to your site. And the most common protocol for authenticating users is OAuth or OpenID Connect. And the implementation of this protocol depends on what authentication provider you use. So you would usually use some packages such as OIDC, which is a general purpose package that works with OpenID Connect, which, as a disclaimer, I built it myself. And you can either use a specific provider like Firebase Auth or Google Sign-in or Okta Sign-in, depending on what authentication provider you choose to have. And another similar problem would be authorization, which is the ability to allow or disallow some actions or areas in your site based on the user permissions, which, well, is also based on your work on authentication, which we discussed previously, and routing. So routing, which is the ability to navigate the user between different views, and also the ability to handle redirects. So usually you will need the user to access a specific part of the site only if they have the permission to do so. And one of the packages that are really good for routing is GoRouter, which is, well, it's probably the best package in Flutter right now for routing. There are also some other non-functional requirements, as they're called, which is that your app should be adaptive. It should work in all platforms. So, for example, in Android, you have sensors. The platform exposes the phone sensors you have, similar to iOS. But on desktop, you don't have, for example, a GPS available. So your app should be adaptive to the different hardware requirements you have on your device. It should work on iOS as iOS users expect. It should work on Android as Android users expect. It should work on desktop as desktop users expect. And this is a little bit different from the second one, which is responsiveness, which is the ability for your website to react according to different widths or screen sizes. So you can either have a very large tablet or a very small phone displaying the same app, and the same app should be able to respond to these sizes accordingly. It should not display very large texts or very small text. It should be natural to the user. Your app should also have animations, which, well, they add a layer of beauty to the app, and they also make the user be able to focus on specific UI elements which you have animated. So it's a really powerful thing to have. Your app should also react in real time to events, either locally, for example, a timer going off, or a local notification being clicked, or from the back end. So you would have something like notifications from the back end that will, for example, a user commented on your post. So your app should be able to display real-time events. And your app should also support searching and filtering, which mean that you should be able to display elements that take user inputs, which are forms. So, what are forms? Forms are a way for users to control how they want your app. You can display a form to the user, well, that take his name, his age, his even click on a button, anything you want. But really important requirements for forms that are usually skipped is that they should be serializable and deserializable, which means that whatever the user writes in your form, you should combine it as, for example, a JSON object and be able to send it to the backend for saving and loading. It should also be noted that forms should be dynamic. For example, if your backend supports that the user can input an infinite number of mobile numbers, your form should display the ability for the user to enter unlimited phone numbers. It should not force the user to enter only one or two or three phone numbers because you don't make your form dynamic. Your form should also be validatable, meaning that you should display validation errors for the user when the input they give is not what you expect or what the backend expects. Your app should also have consistent architecture, which is very important, as I said, when working in a company. So your app should be split in two parts. Your app's pages should be split in two parts. The view part, which is responsible for displaying UI elements, and the controller part, which is able to handle the business logic itself and also control what the view displays. You should also have tests for your app, which is, well, a very complex topic because you have different types of tests. You have unit tests, which is, well, testing a single function that has little to no dependencies. And you also have integration tests, which are basically emulating your app in a process and giving your emulated app inputs and expecting it to output specific outputs. These tests should have high coverage, meaning that they should test multiple lines in your code. So, what we would usually do is have an app that has, for example, 1,000 lines of code, and then you would write tests for every single line of those, spanning every single line. But usually, integration tests are very hard to write because you're emulating user input, which, depending on your UI, can actually be really, really complex to handle. Your app should also be source controlled. For example, we all know Git or GitHub or GitLab. They are all ways for you to store your code, be able to version it, restore it when necessary, and they are all also tools for tracking issues or pull requests or bugs. So they are platforms for developers to collaborate together, especially for large teams. These are very important. And they also help with shipping the app. For example, in continuous integration and continuous deployment, CI/CD. Your app should also handle errors properly. For example, you should display useful and relevant errors to the user. You should also show tips on how to solve the error that the user just saw. You should also probably not disrupt the user if the error is non-fatal. You should also not crash the app when there is an error. And most importantly, what many people forget is to report the errors to the backend, which some tools provide, like Firebase Crashlytics. What this helps with is that instead of the customer going through the trouble of reporting that there is a bug in your system or your app, you get that crash, you get that error firsthand by connecting error reporting to the backend. Your app should also have a splash screen when loading, preferably with progress if loading will take a long time, so that users don't get bored, because users get bored very fast. Your app should also be themable. It should support light and dark mode, because some people prefer light mode and others prefer dark mode, especially developers. Your app should also be localizable, both in language, so you would translate the same text in multiple languages, and also, very importantly, in text direction, because not all languages are written from left to right. Some languages, specifically Arabic, Hindu, and other, right to left languages, they are written from the right to the left. And your app's UI should reflect that. It should display, for example, the first item on the right instead on the left. Your app should also be fast with, no stuttering. And doing that is a very complex problem to solve. So you usually would use isolates when doing heavy work. So you would just, for example, the main thread, which is displaying your app, should do mainly simple work like updating the UI, maybe looping over something, simple things like that. But complex things like, for example, serialization and deserialization should be offsetted to different isolates to make sure your app has no stuttering. There is also a very common problem in front end development, which is the N+1 problem. What this problem means is that, for example, let's imagine you have a list of users, and then your backend developer gives you an API that gets how many comments each user has. So you would give it the user ID, and it would output how many comments this user has made. What the N+1 problem means is that, first of all, there is a request to fetch the list of users. So, for example, you get 100 users, and then you would need to loop over each user in order to get their comment count. What you have just made is that you have made 100 plus 1, the original request, 101 requests in order to get user data versus just one request containing user data, which is, as I said, it's a very common and dangerous problem. Some people also can put requests in the build methods in Flutter. So every frame your app would be sending requests to the backend. It's not a cheap problem to discover or resolve. Your app should also have pagination for long lists of data. So you shouldn't be displaying 10,000 users instantly to the app user. No, you should display them either 10 by 10, 20 by 20. As long as the user is scrolling, you're requesting data from the backend. Your app should also integrate well with the underlying platform. So if your phone has a camera, your app should be able to utilize the camera. If your phone has a microphone, your app should be able to utilize the microphone. So your app should not feel distant from the underlying platform. It should feel as a part of it, as if it were written natively. But most importantly, what most people don't focus on is that your app should do what the customer needs. What I see most people do is that they would waste weeks or even months on writing architecture without actually doing what the customer wanted. The customer wants an app that manages their supermarket, but they don't want you to write 10,000 lines of code of architecture to achieve that, right? The customer wants things fast and they want things working good. They don't want things that look good to you. And that's it. Thank you. There is any questions, I'm available.
Hello, Ahmed. Thank you for your time and your magnificent presentation. Michael asked something right now for you.
So
Michael
is there
asked,
any notable challenges or limitations that developers commonly face when
yes.
using Flutter? So the limitations you would face in Flutter are actually non-existent by definition, because what Flutter is actually a UI framework or a plugin built on the native tools you already use. So for example, if you're writing an Android app, what you would do is create an Android project, a native Android project. And in Flutter, what you actually do is also create a native Android project that connects with, well, some Flutter code. So Flutter actually has no limitations. As long as you can do it on the native platform, you can do it on Flutter. But there are some things that are hard to do on Flutter than other things. But I wouldn't consider them limitations. There's just inconveniences.
So someone else would like to ask something? Well, I would like to ask you something as a personal
Yeah, sure.
question. I would like to ask if like why Flutter? Why did you choose Flutter?
Yes, so why Flutter is a very good question. But as I said, Flutter
As a
integrates,
career?
yes, Flutter integrates well with native platforms. So I have tried React Native, and it is very complex to get started with compared to Flutter. And the Flutter package ecosystem is really friendly to developers. And when things are easy to developers, it means that you can get more work faster, which means professionally you have succeeded because you can get many customers in a short time. So this is the main reason why I picked Flutter as, well, the main front end stack we use.
Okay, amazing. And another one from Leandro. Leandro, what do
Yeah,
you think
so
about the future of Flutter?
yeah, so personally, I, I think like any framework has like three stages. First of all, the what do you call it, the new stage. It's a new technology, the buzzwords are coming, people are talking about it, it's starting to get famous. And then there is the peak phase, which is like when the framework has reached popularity, it has reached maturity, it works well, it works fast, people are using it. And then the last stage, which, well, what I will call it the death stage, which is when the framework starts deteriorating, either in terms of performance, because the framework tries to do many things it's not supposed to do, and with support, like packages, you would see packages being outdated, you would see bugs not being fixed for years, and things like these are what would kill a framework. And Flutter right now, I would say, is in the maturity phase. It hasn't yet shown signs of deteriorating just yet, but you, as any framework, you should be prepared to switch to the better alternative whenever you have the chance.
Thank you. And now we have like Gustavo.
Oh, the LinkedIn is linked. Yeah, I can also share the. I've already shared the slide link with the host, so you can also get it from there.
And now I have Maicon again.
So, as a front-end developer, how do you balance the need for a visually attractive website with performance optimization and accessibility requirements? Well, that's a very interesting question, because there is always a trade-off during any type of development. So for visual attractiveness, you would practically do what the UI mock says. What the graphic designer sent you, that's what you should do, because that's what also the customer has agreed to. So visual attractiveness is the requirement you want to achieve. And then the performance optimization is the secondary, what we would call non-functional requirement. It is a requirement that, well, your app would work with bad optimization, but it would also be bad for users. So what I would do personally was build the website as the customer wants it to look like, and then do my best to, well, increase the performance as much as possible by following best practices. As I said, you can offset long running operations or very slow operations to different isolates, different threads. And for accessibility, there are semantic widgets in Flutter. They're very easy to work with. So you should be implementing this as you go. So yeah, that's it. It's a very hard thing to balance at first, but if you keep following best practices, it will get easy.
Next one is from Eva.
So, are there any notable limitations or challenges in using Flutter for certain types of apps? As I said, Flutter technically is an addition to the underlying platform. It's not a replacement. So for web, you're using JavaScript, HTML, CSS. In Flutter, you can also use JavaScript, HTML, and CSS for your entire app, and only like have one page or two pages using Flutter. So there are no not notable limitations or challenges. You can even build games in Flutter. What as long as Flutter supports the underlying platform, you can use it there. I don't think there are any limitations whatsoever. There's just more effort to make Flutter communicate with the underlying platform, which is what packages do. What packages or plugins do is that they add to your Flutter app the ability to talk to the underlying platform. And you don't see this because people have done a great job of supporting different needs. Like you have, for example, authentication. It's very common thing, and people have done great effort in helping other developers do it. So you don't really face any challenges, is what I would say.
Thank you. The next one is Gabriel.
So, is Flutter the best option for mobile development? Currently, I would say yes. It is the easiest and best platform for mobile development, even if you want to develop on a single platform. So personally, if the customer only wants an Android app, I would still use Flutter and output only the Android part. Even if Flutter supports iOS, it supports macOS, supports web, I'm able to have the decision to add other platforms when I need to, not be like worrying about that I need to rewrite the code for a different platform just because the customer wants to add a new platform.
Now we have Max.
So, what do you recommend for anyone who wants to work abroad, even with mobile or programming in general? Well, to work abroad is a different problem, really, because you have to find a customer, and finding a customer abroad is different than like writing your CV and emailing it to the HR email of some company, because what you need is the ability to convince people that your work is, well, professional. And to do that, what I really have noticed during, well, years of experience is that proof is, well, the biggest attractive point. The ability for you to prove your skills is very important here. And the best way to prove you're good in programming is open source contribution. When you're able to contribute to open source projects on GitHub, on GitLab, or anything, that gives off signals that you are confident in your skills with the platform, the underlying platform you work on. And when I want to send my CV to someone, all I do is just send my GitHub page. It contains your activities, it contains what work did you do, which, as I said, has proof. It contains when did you do your work, how active are you, and, well, people can evaluate you without you having to do any real effort. So yeah, that's just a little tip here. If you want to work abroad, just get your GitHub page or GitLab page to look as good as possible.
Thank you. Now the question is from Yankee.
So, what do you think is the best way to learn a front end language? Well, there are actually two parts in learning a front end stack. First of all, you would need to learn the language, which is, in the case of Flutter, is Dart. The Dart language is actually very similar to other languages that you might have used. It's using the C family syntax, so C sharp, C++, C, and it's really great because it's also garbage collected. So you don't have to do any memory management. You don't have to worry about pointers. You don't have to worry about anything. It's just they made Dart be familiar. So you would be able to write it if you have done any sort of programming before. So the best way to learn a front end language is to first learn the language and then learn the framework, which is, well, Flutter framework in this case. And the best place to learn these things are the online documentations, the official online documentations of these frameworks. I hate online courses because, well, while they might look good, they don't provide the full picture. They can't provide the full picture because getting the information from the source is different than getting the information from someone who tried the framework, right? That's what online courses are. People try the framework and they post their experience in a video. So the best way to learn a front-end language is just open the flutter.dev website, which is the official documentation, and you will get all sorts of information. Everything you need is listed there.
Thank you so much for answering all of those questions. I would like to ask the last one, I think, if anyone... Lucas has one other. Go ahead, Lucas.
Yeah. So, is there a great demand for Flutter developers instead of React Native developers? Well, the thing about React Native is that it has been alive longer than Flutter. So businesses tend to think that React Native is like the safe choice for cross-platform development specifically. And Flutter, since it's new, well, companies think there is like an inherent risk of adapting a new platform that, well, it hasn't been time tested, things like that. But personally, I think that Flutter has more potential than React Native. So, well, the great demand question, well, it depends really on what company you intend to work for. Some new companies, for example, startups, would love to use Flutter because it's really easy for developers to use, which means they can get the product faster, which is, well, crucial. But maybe older companies would prefer working with React Native because, as I said, it has been time tested.
Thank you so much. Any questions? Do you have people from the chat have other questions? Well, I would like to ask another question,
Yeah,
a
sure.
personal one. Actually, I would like to ask, what is the, if you think that Flutter will use Kotlin for those mobile and web designs. Do you think Flutter will get through a moment that will overcome those languages that are good
I'm
used
sorry,
in big
can you
companies like
repeat the
React?
first part?
Of
I
course.
couldn't hear it. Yes.
I asked, if do you think that Flutter will overcome language like Kotlin and React Native further of the time, when people get more trust in it, because, well, it's maybe better for mobile service and web service, do you think?
Yeah, so the thing about Flutter is that it is language independent, meaning that you can actually develop an Android app in Java or Kotlin, an iOS app in Swift or Objective-C, a web app in JavaScript, TypeScript. It doesn't matter what you use as a base. Flutter can add to it. It is a plug-in layer that adds things. It doesn't replace Kotlin. It doesn't replace native Android development. So it's what's really great about Flutter is that it has an add to app feature. So you can write your app the way you see fit using, well, native existing technologies, and then for a specific part of the app, for example, the dashboard, you would need it to like be cross-platform because, well, the admin wants to see things on his phone the same as the web. So this is where Flutter shines. It can just add that specific part in your app. The Flutter engine is that compatible. It runs anywhere. That's the beauty of it, and that's why, yes, I think Flutter will be able um to be better in general. Yes.
Oh, that's amazing to know that Flutter can co-participate with those other languages and improve the mobile and web development. That's amazing. Thank you so much for your participation, Ahmed. I think there's
Thank you.
no more questions, so I think we can finish. But we hope that you can stay with us and participate next year as well. We really enjoyed your lecture, and it was amazing. And for sure, I think there are lots of people that are way more interested in Flutter, and way more people that want to get better in Flutter as well. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
And
It
see
has
you.
been a nice time. Thank you.
A gente gostaria de agradecer a todo mundo que participou dessa palestra e também dizer que a gente vai ter o nosso momento de almoço agora e às 4 horas voltamos com a palestra do Lucas sobre a história de vida dele, a sua formação em computação na UFLA, em ciência da computação na UFLA, e agora ele está trabalhando em uma empresa irlandesa. Ele vai contar um pouco mais como é ser um engenheiro de software lá e como ele está lidando, pois ele também é professor de sistemas de informação. E espero que vocês também venham e vejam a palestra dele, que vai ser muito interessante, vai ser muito enriquecedor. Tá? Muito obrigada pela atenção de vocês e tchau, tchau!